Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Jaya Gopijana Vallabha Girivardhari. Jaya Gopijana Vallabha. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yashodanandana Vrajajana Ranjana. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Yamuna Tira Vanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Jayam Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya Astotra Sata Srimad His Divine Grace Srila A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Anantakoti Vaishnavrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai Prem Sikaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinda Ki Jai Shri Shri Radha Krishna Gopa Gopinath Shyamakund Radhakund Giri Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Gangamai Ki Jai Yunamai Ki Jai Tulsi Maharani Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Gaura Premanandi. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Shri Guru and Garanga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So we're reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 6, text number 39. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Ato Bhagavato māyā. Ato Bhagavato māyā. Māyinām. api mohinī, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare. Ladies, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, na veda kim utāpare, ato bhagavato māyā, māyinām api mohinī, yat svayam cātma-vartmātmā, apare. Ataḥ, therefore, bhagavatāḥ, godly, māyā, potencies, māyinām, of the jugglers, api, even, mohinī, enchanting, yat, that which, svayam, personally, cha, also, ātma-vartma, self-sufficient, ātmā, self, na, does not, veda, no, kim, what, utā, to speak of, apare, others. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Translation: the wonderful potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is bewildering even to the jugglers. That potential power is unknown even to the self-sufficient Lord, so it is certainly unknown to others. Please repeat. The wonderful potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead is bewildering even to the jugglers. That potential power is unknown even to the self-sufficient Lord. So it is certainly unknown to others. Purport. The froggish philosophers and mundane wranglers in science and mathematical calculation may not believe in the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, but they are sometimes puzzled by the wonderful jugglery of man and nature. Such jugglers and magicians of the mundane world are actually puzzled by the jugglery of the Lord in his transcendental activities. But they try to adjust their bewilderment by saying that it is all mythology. There is, however, nothing impossible or mythological in the Supreme Omnipotent Person. The most wonderful puzzle for the mundane wranglers is that while they remain calculating the length and breadth of the unlimited potency of the Supreme Person, his faithful devotees are set free from the bondage of material engagement simply by appreciating the wonderful jugglery of the Supreme in the practical field. The devotees of the Lord see the wonderful dexterity in everything with which they come in contact in all circumstances of eating, sleeping, working, etc. A small banyan fruit contains thousands of small seeds, and each seed holds the potency of another tree, which again holds the potency of many millions of such fruits as causes and effects. So the trees and seeds engage the devotees in meditation about the activities of the Lord, while the mundane wranglers waste time in dry speculation and mental concoction, which are fruitless in both this life and the next. In spite of their pride in speculation, they can never appreciate the simple, potential activities of the banyan tree. Such speculators are poor souls destined to remain in matter perpetually. It's very interesting how Srila Prabhupada is so condemning of the scientists. Always. You never find a place where Srila Prabhupada speaks kindly about the scientists in general. In general, his mood is to blast them. Even sometimes he says to kick in their face with shoes, specifically with shoes, not without shoes. So here we see how he's describing how these materialistic people are puzzled by the jugglery of the Lord. So it's interesting how in the world you have legend and you have myth, right? Legend is considered to be most probably true. Some personality did some incredible thing, and that because of the incredible actions of that person, then they are legendary. It becomes a legend. And then you have mythology, which is just completely made up. Could never have happened, never did happen. And it's interesting how, like many years ago, like if you go back 500 years or more, sometimes you see these maps of the world, and especially maps of the oceans, and they're done in a very old-fashioned style, and there'll be a little, in some place in the ocean, there'll be a little thing that says, "There be monsters here. There be monsters." Because in those days, like nowadays we have the internet, we have TV, we have the radio, we have newspapers, and there's no such thing as monsters. Do we believe in monsters? No, don't, come on, give me a break. Monsters, that's something from 500 years ago or 1,000 years ago. So for modern man to to consider the amazing activities of the Lord, it's just beyond their capacity. I remember when I first joined at the manor, when I was 16, I was really excited. Actually, when I was about 12, there was a TV program called Kung Fu, and it was all about a young boy. He was an orphan. He was living in China, and he decided to go to the Shaolin Temple to surrender there and become a monk. So he was amongst many boys that were standing outside. The Shaolin Temple had this policy that they would test new monks before they would let them in the temple. So for days, these boys are sitting outside, and then you see it rains, and some of the boys go away, and then something else happens, and some boys go away. So finally, there's just a few boys left outside the Shaolin Temple, and the door opens, and they welcome them, please come in. So about 4 or 5 boys come in, and they sit down in front of the master, and they each have a little table, and some tea is poured for the master and for the boys. And then nearly all the boys pick up the tea and start drinking it, except for one boy. And then one of the monks, he says, you can all go, but you stay. So he says, why did you not drink the tea? And he says, the master had not drunk. How could I drink before the master? He says, yes, very good, you can stay. So this boy becomes initiated as a Shaolin monk, and he's 12 years old, and in the temple he learns all about the differences between apparent reality and what actual reality is. So he's living his life as a monk in the ashram, and then later on he's half American. He goes to America to search for his brother, and in the story in the TV program, the way it works is he's traveling in America, and because he's Chinese, he's discriminated against. This is in the 1890s or something like that, and they discriminate against the Chinese in America at that time. But because he knows Kung Fu, he's an expert in Kung Fu fighting, he always tries to avoid fighting until the very end when it's inevitable, he cannot escape from fighting, and then he just immediately just attacks them and finishes people. So it's a very exciting story. And every now and then there's a flashback to his life in the monastery as a boy, learning spiritual life. So I saw that program and I thought, I want to be like that boy. I want to be a monk living in the monastery, in the Gurukul. And so, you know, I was always thinking, but how can I? I'm just an English schoolboy stuck in this mundane English world, you know, just with other schoolboys who have no interest in anything like that. They're just interested in whatever the bands are playing on the TV, or what the last movie was that, you know, someone killed so many people. They're all very mundane. So it was a few years until finally I was 16, I met the devotees. And I met the devotees actually when I was 10, but slowly, I began to realize what it was that they had to offer. So I called the manor up, and I said, I'd like to come and visit you. So I came to visit the manor, and I just realized that this is it. This is the Shaolin Temple of my dreams. You know, I want to live with these devotees. So I visited one time, and then they told me, next time come into central London, because it's easier to get to the manor from central London. We'll pick you up after Harinam. So on Saturday, I went to the temple in London, and it was nice. There was hardly anyone in the temple, Radha Londonishwara in central London, very place. And there were just a handful of Indian devotees, not devotees, just Indian guests that were there. And they offered them some prasad. So the guests took just a little handful of prasad in their hands, you know, and then they took the prasad, and they asked me if I'd like some prasad. So I said, of course. So it was the afternoon offering, and they had like fruits and sweets. So they gave me a little plateful, so I ate that, and they said, would you like some more? I said, okay. So they gave me another plateful of prasadam, so I ate that. They said, would you like some more? I said, oh, God, I couldn't take it. No, take some more, take some more. So they gave me another plate, so I finished that, and they said, would you like some more? So in this way, I was like, no. They said, no, you have to finish it, you have to finish. So I had about 7 or 8 plates of Mahaprasad, the best Radha Londonishwara Mahaprasad. And then the Sankirtan devotees came at about 7 p.m., and I went into the van, and they drove me back to Bhaktivedanta Manor. And then they gave me a sleeping bag and you know, some things for the night. So I stayed there over the night. The next morning, we went to Mangalarti. And that was my first experience getting up very early in the morning. I'd never got up at 3:30, 4 o'clock in the morning before. And went to the temple room for Mangalarti. And then someone came and gave me a bead bag and showed me how to chant Hare Krishna. And I'm sitting very self-consciously, like, I didn't want to move my lips because, if you sit there kind of moving your lips, people will think you're mad. Isn't it? In normal life, no one sits there and just mutters to them. If people sit there and mutter to themselves, people think, oh, it must be a madman. So I was thinking, I don't want... But everyone else was doing it, but I was very embarrassed. And so then finally, gradually various things happened, and I decided to surrender and shave my head and everything like that. And one day, just after prasadam, we were washing our plates in the washroom there. And one devotee came up to me. Now, when you first join, especially in those days in the ashram, everyone is just like a pure devotee, as far as you're concerned. Everyone is just like special devotees. They're all sadhus, saints. And so one of them, when I was washing my plate, he came up to me and he said, "Do you really believe all this? Do you really believe that there are people with 4 arms and 4 heads and blue? And do you believe that the universe is sitting on the back of a turtle? Really, you believe that?" And I was like, yeah, why not? I mean, why shouldn't it be? And at first I thought he was challenging me. But then I realized, actually, I think he had doubts himself. He didn't really believe it, because I was 16 years old and he was like 20, 25, something like that. And I noticed shortly after a while, that devotee disappeared. Every now and then, you wake up in the morning and then someone's gone. And, you don't know where they went to. So, but this is the thing that Western people, especially nowadays, although I'm not so sure about nowadays. Back then, this was in the 70s, and there wasn't so much. Now there's so many fantasy movies with fantastical beings and personalities that maybe young people now are more inclined to believe in, the fantastic. Very difficult to say. But for most people, as Purport calls them, mundane wranglers in science and mathematical calculation, they can't possibly believe this. So I remember there was another incident which expanded my horizons. Shortly after I joined, must have been in the summer, 76, Surabi Swami, Abhipalayantam Surabi Swami, came to the Bhaktivedanta Manor. And he'd just been with Prabhupada, and he'd been showing Prabhupada the master plan for Mayapur. Surabi is well known for, he designed he was an architect, and he designed the Krishna Balaram Mandir, he designed the Juhu guest house and temple, he designed Prabhupada's Samadhi. So he was a very accomplished architect. He's actually from Holland, and I think he was in India when he first joined. He met Srila Prabhupada, and Prabhupada found out that he was an architect and asked him to do a design for Krishna Balaram Mandir. And any of you who've been to those places, you can see what a wonderful architect he was. It was amazing, his architecture. So Prabhupada was very pleased with him. So he came through the manor, and he was asked to give a presentation on the Mayapur project. So this is 76, and in the manor, I'm just a young boy. And a Sunday morning, and Sunday mornings we would always have a very long class. It would extend maybe for 2 or 3 hours. So he came and he had some papers to show us, and he was describing the Mayapur project. And as he was describing it, he was describing that in different directions, north, south, east, and west, different activities are supposed to go on. As far as I remember, northeast was the Brahmins and education. So in the northeast segment, so you have a piece of land, so many acres. We had about 600 acres of land. We're getting slowly increasing that amount. And in that 600 acres of land, in the northeast quarter, is primarily meant for Brahmins and education. And then as far as I remember, the southwest was for Kshatriyas. And like this, different parts of the town are ideal for certain kinds of activities and certain kinds of people. So then he described how do you ascertain what are those activities, what are those people. So then he described the Brahmins, Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, and the Shudras, and there's a shastra called Vastu Shastra, which delineates which varna will be best situated in which sector of a town. So I was fascinated that, I knew Krishna consciousness. I remember one time I was here in Mayapur, I was doing some design work, and some English guests were brought to me. And because I was an Englishman, they thought, well, let's bring them to him, he can preach to them a little bit. So I was preaching to them about the master, because later on, when I came back to Mayapur in 91, I was working into the town plan. The seed had been planted in 76, and I was working on the town plan for Mayapur. So these guests were brought into my room, and I was showing them, I was explaining the master plan to them. And after a little while, they said, wow, that's amazing. They said, we know you Hare Krishnas, like, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. We thought that's the sum and substance of the Hare Krishna movement, is jumping around in the street in London and handing out popcorn. So, when I first joined, I remember when I first joined, I'd been in the temple for 3 months, and then they started a Bhakta program. And in the Bhakta program, we were introduced to different books to help us learn to be devotees. And I remember there was talk of the gopis in the forest of Vrindavan. And I was like, what's that? Something like a kangaroo or something? I couldn't figure out what's a gopi. It was just such a strange name for an English boy in London, to hear this. But then, of course, I soon found out what the gopis were. But so, Westerners completely bewildered and ignorant about all these different things. So, where was I? Oh, yeah. So Surabi was giving this master plan, and he introduced us to Vastu Shastra. And it blew my mind that Krishna consciousness isn't just Hare Krishna in the street, but actually there are all these shastras related to it, and it's a complete way of life. You can actually, you come to Krishna consciousness and you can actually engage in town planning, of all things. So it's very interesting, this introduction to town planning. And I'm going to read something for you. Yes, so Varnashram, Vastu leads to Varnashram, because the Vastu describes where the Varnas are situated. So what are these Varnas? What do they do? Why are they in those places? What's going on here? What is this division? Why this kind of group of people here, another group of people here, another group of people here, another group of people here? So we understand actually, Prabhupada describes how Varnashram is ultimately, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu rejected Varnashram, right? To become Krishna conscious, you don't need Varnashram. It's not a necessity. But Prabhupada describes how Varnashram is there to help us to become Krishna conscious. It's to help us is to create a favorable environment in which we become more aware of what's really going on in the world, and we're guided according to our Varna as to the best way to realize our full potential. So initially, Varnashram is required as a crutch or as a framework by which we can become Krishna conscious. So it's interesting how it's very actually, quite vast in its application. There's a story in Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 1, verse 40, and it's about Priyavrata. I'll read it to you. To stop the quarreling among different peoples, Maharaj Priyavrata marked boundaries at rivers and at the edges of mountains and forests so that no one would trespass upon another's property. Purport. The example set by Maharaj Priyavrata in marking of different states is still followed. As indicated here, different classes of men are destined to live in different areas, and therefore the boundaries of various tracts of land, which are described here as islands, should be defined by different rivers, forests, and hills. So we can understand that in the world, like for instance in the Arab world, it's known that the Arabs are always fighting. There's always fighting between the different tribes of Arabs. And it's been going on since time immemorial, and I think it's maybe it's a bit relaxed now with the UAE and all this kind of stuff. Now that they've got lots of money and limousines and fancy airports, they're a little bit less in the fighting spirit. But historically, the Arabs were always fighting. And we also see in Africa, African tribes, warlords, there was often a lot of fighting. Even here in India, there were different kingdoms, and there was fighting going on. So there are different races of people. We see around the world, you've got the Chinese, you've got the Arabs, you've got the Mongolians, you've got the Europeans, so many different types of people, and they're known to have mentalities, various types of mentalities, which are quite prominent. I remember, like, for instance, growing up in England, you have our immediate neighbors, the French and the Irish. The Englishmen have all sorts of jokes about the French and the Irish, right? I heard in Scandinavia, the Swedes will tell jokes about the Finns, and the Finns will tell jokes about the Danes. And all the neighbors, they're always criticizing each other and fighting each other. So this is a common thing in human society. We have, of course, the material world is here for us to work through these kinds of differences and ultimately to give us an opportunity to come to Krishna consciousness. But until that happens, divisions are there. So Priyavata Maharaj divided the world. He goes on in the purport. The Naishada race was given a place in the forest because by nature they are thieves and rogues. As animals are given in places in various forests and hills, men who are like animals are also destined to live there. One cannot be promoted to civilized life unless one comes to Krishna consciousness, for by nature one is destined to live in a particular situation according to one's karma and association with the modes of nature. So here we can see it quite clearly. Prabhupada is describing that the division is there, the division, whether it's the divisions that are described by that Priyavata made, or the divisions in Varnas, in the Varnashram system. It's all meant to bring us to that point of Krishna consciousness. And when we become Krishna conscious, that you don't need those things anymore. And it reminds me of, in the early days of Krishna consciousness, like when I joined at the manor, there must have been about 300 devotees in the English yatra. And they were all from all walks of life. You know, we had from the craziest Hell's Angels. I don't know if you know, Hell's Angels are these guys that ride on motorcycles with leather jackets, long hair. They have a skull and crossbones on the back of their coats, you know. I think Padmalochan was an English devotee that used to live here. He came from a Hell's Angels background. Before he became a devotee, he was a Hell's Angel. So we had people from all these different backgrounds, all living in the temple, you know, next to each other in sleeping bags, sleeping 6 inches apart, taking bath, you know, in the shower room together, taking prasadam together. And I often thought to myself, there's no way I would associate with any of these people if he weren't a devotee. If they weren't devotees, they would be, you know, they were so diametrically opposite in terms of opinions and behavior and character. But Krishna consciousness brought them all together. And we see the early days of the movement, there was so much cooperation, so many devotees. There was so, enamored by Srila Prabhupada. You know, that Srila Prabhupada was such an aristocratic individual, so different to them, so learned and saintly, and everyone could see that he was just this very, very special personality. And because of his influence, and because they could see that he knew all the answers. I remember just before I joined, I got the Easy Journey to Other Planets book. And I was reading that book. I was working temporarily in a landscape gardening company for a few weeks. And every lunchtime, I would read that book, and I couldn't put it down. I was just amazed at Srila Prabhupada's explanations and the answers he gave in that book. So anyone who had anything to do with Srila Prabhupada, when they read his books and they heard his speaking, they could see that he knows everything. And so because of that, people from all these different walks of life were able to come together and surrender to him. So as Prabhupada says here, if you want to live in peace and harmony, you must take to Krishna consciousness. Where are we? Maharaj Priyavrata divided the surface of the globe into different islands so that each class of men would live peacefully and not clash with the others. The modern idea of nationhood has gradually developed from the divisions made by Maharaj Priyavrata. So now, the situation we find ourselves in today is we have a world full of nations. You know, it's like there's a group of people that are similar. As I mentioned before, I think it was Kadambakanda Maharaj. Kadambakanda Maharaj was from Holland. He's a Dutchman. And people from Holland, they speak most European languages because no one speaks Dutch. Holland is such a small place that no one ever bothers to learn Dutch. So the Dutch people have to learn all the other languages because they're surrounded by England and France and Germany. So Maharaj was telling me that when he was in different temples, he could see the mentality of the people in different temples. The Germanic people are very abrupt. He was saying, like, for instance, when Harikesh left the movement, you'd be in the ashram and one of the German devotees would say, "That's it, I've had enough, I'm going." He'd walk out the door, slam, and that was it. It was like, I've had enough. Whereas in Sweden, suddenly someone would just disappear, and then a few days later you'd realize they were gone. So the Swedish were very quiet and very self-controlled and very self-contained, whereas the Germans were very, so like that, these different people have different, very strong mentalities. And those mentalities, whether it's a mentality or whether it's a religion, that there are different divisions according to different categories. And those people living in that one area, like in England, it was very easy because it's an island. So the English are there, and they have their self-identification. And then, the Arabs are in their Arab world, completely different. Growing up in London in the 60s, the street I grew up in was all white English people until I was about 3. And then Punjabis started moving in, right? Many Indian people had been given a British passport because India had been in the British Raj. And so many Indian people in India had been given British passports, but most of them didn't take advantage, but a few did. And many people from Punjab started coming to Southall. I lived in this little town called Southall in London. And my grandfather would come home in the afternoon and he would say, "Rose, there's Indians in number 36. And then a few weeks later, there'd be, "Rose, there's Indian people in number 47. And slowly, the streets the houses in the street were being filled up with Indian people. And I was like 5 or 6 years old, and I was like, eventually a Punjabi family moved in just opposite us, and they had kids the same age as me. So immediately I'm out playing with the kids, running around in their house and everything like that. But I remember one time I was in the house, and I ran past the kitchen, and I suddenly started coughing and choking. It was like, because they were cooking chili. And when they're frying the chili, it becomes very acrid, and I'd never, salt and pepper is the only spice the English people would use. In 1963, you had your boiled potatoes, your meat, and your salt and pepper. And so chilies and all these other things was just like, what is this? And then these people would keep the curtains closed all day long in the house. It's like, why are they keeping the curtains closed? What's going on in there? What are they doing? So my grandparents were like in their 50s, 60s, and they just couldn't relate to it at all. And slowly, now Southall is completely Indian. Every cinema plays Indian movies. Every sweet shop is an Indian sweet shop. The whole place is completely Indian. There's practically no white English people living there whatsoever. So this was from 1963 up until the present day. Sometimes they would call it the Khyber Pass. I don't know why they call it the Khyber Pass, because that's in Afghanistan, but I think Khyber Pass is between India and Afghanistan. So you drive through Southall and you entered into India. Even the train station, Southall train station, is written in Punjabi. It's the only train station in England where Southall is written in Punjabi. Punjabi script. So, so these different countries, these different places, they assumed nationhood. They assumed a nation state, an identity. We are British. We are American. We are German. You know, from 1940 to 1945, it was the patriotic duty of every Englishman to hate every German man, right? Because England was at war with Germany. And so you had to hate them. That was it. That was it. They're all evil. They're all demons. They've got to be killed and hated. So like this, nationhood suddenly reared its head after, as Purport describes here, these divisions that Priyavata made eventually gave rise to nationhood. So then Prabhupada, he goes on about nationhood. He says, let Krishna consciousness movement give this sense to these rascals. They do not know how to adjust things. They simply plan their united nation, but they do not know what is that plan. Yes, united nation, the nations should be united. But first of all, why nation? This word is not there in the Vedic language. There is no conception of nation. There is conception of varnashram everywhere, not for any particular nation or any particular country, but everyone according to quality. First-class man, second-class man, third-class man, that is everywhere. Everywhere you go, you find some people first-class intelligent, some people less than him, some people less than him, up to fourth class, and then fifth class. So this was in New Vrindavan, a conversation Prabhupada was having. So that's very interesting. And actually, it's amazing how that little statement of Prabhupada's there is the source of world peace, right? Everyone talks about world peace, you know, end war, we should have peace. And the solution is right here. It's extremely simple. In the very beginning, I was mentioning about how Krishna consciousness is the panacea. It's that one thing that will bring people together from all sorts of different walks of life. So we may have so many differences of opinion, so many differences due to habit or race, but all of these things can be reconciled simply by adding Krishna consciousness and becoming Krishna conscious and adopting or understanding that we're all the same. This conception of nation is not there in the Vedic literature. Varnashram is there. So varnashram is the key which takes us from materialistic life to spiritual life. Such an important thing. So going back to Surab's visit, Surabhi Swami, I was very inspired, as I mentioned, about Surabhi's visit. And gradually, I was involved in various... it was interesting, my life in Krishna consciousness was a bit different in the sense of I was always involved in technical works. In the beginning, like in Europe and in England, devotees would go out and rent a house and convert it into a temple, and then they would start preaching to the local people. So my job was always to convert the house into a temple. I'd have to go and take a room and convert it into a temple, try and make it look as Vedic as possible. A restaurant, we'd open a restaurant, I'd have to try and add some Vedic aspects to the restaurant. So in the beginning of my life, I was always involved. We could never afford to hire carpenters or electricians or any of these people, so I had to learn to do all those things. So I was always building things, trying to make it look Vedic. And then finally, in '86, I came here to India. And first of all, I was on Padayatra, walking from town to town, village to village, which was an amazing experience for me because in the UK, Krishna consciousness was still somewhat theoretical. It was still in the books, but we were surrounded by English people who had no interest in Krishna consciousness. For them, Krishna consciousness is just some weird cult. But when I came to India and I was walking through the villages, I remember one time I was walking through one village, shaved head, dhoti, just a chadar, and I was walking, I'd just taken a bath, I'd washed my cloth, laid it on the ground to dry, and I was just walking to where the Padayatras were staying. There's this one old man was walking towards me, and he stopped, and he went, Gouda, 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 because I have like kind of blonde hair, and I was tanned, and the sun was shining on me, and I must have looked like saintly or something. And he was like astonished. There's this white sadhu, sadhu. He's there. And, he'd never seen anything like it. That was the great thing about Padayatra, was we go into these interior villages where people some of them have never been to Delhi even, what to speak of anywhere else, to some foreign land. And so I saw Vedic culture firsthand, all the things that I'd read about in Srimad Bhagavatam. When I walked through the villages and I saw how you could do madhukari, you could go to a farmer's door and they would give you chash and roti, and they respected you as sadhu. I was shocked. So I began to see how Vedic culture was so important. So I was here in Mayapur, and having a technical background, I was asked to do research for the TOVP, because in those days they wanted to build the TOVP using natural materials. And so I was looking into Roman architecture, how the Romans, because before steel came along, construction was done without any steel. Nowadays everything is RCC, reinforced cement concrete, with steel inside. But we wanted to build using none of those things. So I was doing research on natural building materials, and I came across an architect from South India who was designing low-cost housing. So I suggested to Harikesh we should do that system of housing. And so he asked me to design a house like that and to build it. So suddenly I went from designing something on paper to building a house, and it was like a whole revolution in my life in terms of my occupation. So then I started studying architecture. I started getting books on architecture, all the architectural magazines that were coming out. Harikesh brought me the AutoCAD, which is a computerized design system. And I had to learn all about town planning. And of course, having the influence of Varnashram, understanding that there are different kinds of mentalities, I met this one devotee, I don't remember his name now, Prabhupada disciple. He was writing a book, and he was living in one corner of Mayapur. He didn't have very much money, so he was living with a bunch of devotees who were mostly the workers, the Mayapur workers. And he was complaining, I can't do anything. Everyone's shouting day and night, morning to evening. They're talking, they don't talk, they shout at each other. And he said, I can't write my book, it's so disturbing. And after a while I began to think to myself, he's a Brahmana, and he's living with people who are engaged in Shudra activity. And so he needs a peaceful environment. So then I was looking into how does Vastu work, and Vastu and Varnashram. If you look at cities like Srirangam is a very ancient city in South India. And it's all designed on a very square grid. There's the Sri Ranganath temple in the middle, and then there's a road around it in a square with a gopuram, a big, huge, fancy gate. And then there's another road around that with another set of gopurams. And basically there's 8 roads all around Sri Rangam temple. And inside the first band of road is where the Brahmins live, because the Brahmanas, they are engaged in puja. They have to do many things involved with the temple. They're doing their different seva. So they need to be right next to the temple. And then around the Brahmanas zone is the Kshatriya zone, because the Kshatriyas are there to protect. They're to protect the deity. Many kings would come and they would give gold and jewels, and it's well known that some of the deities had diamonds in their crowns, extremely valuable. You may have heard recently in Trivandrum, they opened these vaults with crores of rupees of gold. So these temples were very rich, so the Kshatriyas were needed there to protect the assets of the temples and to protect the Brahmins. And then on the next band of roads around the outside of that's where the Vaishyas would be. And the Vaishyas are working with the grains, with the cows. Originally, they were working with the agricultural produce, making sure that the produce was the Kshatriya, the Vaishyas, they see profit everywhere. Everything they do, they see profit is in there. They can find profit anywhere. So they are in that band around on the outside. And then finally the Shudras. The Shudras actually are infused everywhere because they're assistants. Like the Kshatriyas, many of the soldiers in the Kshatriyas' army are not Kshatriyas themselves. They're trained Shudras. So the Shudras would be spread out, except for those that were engaged in making the things like the pots, like the clay pots, they would be around the outside edge and in the villages around. So I came across, when I was doing this work on trying to develop the town plan, I came across a very interesting book called A Pattern Language. And there were a group of architects from California, Berkeley University in California. And they had studied architecture, and they saw how there are certain architectural patterns which are conducive for a certain kind of human behavior. So, like for instance, when I was growing up in London, there were many neighborhoods with terraced houses or small houses with little gardens, and there would be a whole town like that of neighborhoods. Then in the 60s, they knocked all those down, and they built skyscrapers, 20 stories or 10 or 15, 20-story skyscrapers, and they moved everyone from those little communities into the skyscrapers. And immediately the community just disappeared. There was no more community, because the way the streets were laid out originally, people would walk past each other, they would see each other, they would look out of the window, they would be talking to each other. The architecture lent itself to human interaction in a very nice way. But as soon as you put everyone into a block of flats, immediately all that communication stopped. My mother lived in a block of flats like that for some time, and she lived there for like 10 or 15 years, and she didn't know either of the neighbors. There were two doors right next to her. She didn't know who those people were. She never saw them because they came and went at different times. So I started to realize that architecture, the way you design a building and the way you design a town, will be conducive or not towards your human development. And of course, in Krishna consciousness, we need to create an environment in which we can thrive, we can be happy, we can be satisfied, we can be peaceful. So this is why the divisions are there. This is why the varnashram divisions are there, so that a Brahmin can live amongst Brahmanas. The Kshatriyas can live amongst Kshatriyas. You know, Prabhupada would describe sometimes the Kshatriyas would have weddings, and they would get very rowdy, you know, because Kshatriyas are always, you know, showing their arms and their strength and their prowess with their weapons. And sometimes, you know, one Kshatriya will be in front of another one boasting, you know, you can't do what I can do. And then they go, nobody's going to. And there would be a fight. And sometimes in the wedding celebration, you know, these celebrations would go for 5, 6, 7 days. Someone would get killed. One Kshatriya would kill another Kshatriya, right? Now, if that happened in the West, the police would come in, the wedding would be cancelled, you know, you'd be in court for, you know, a year or 6 months or whatever it is. But in the wedding with the Kshatriyas, they would be like, it's okay, he was very fiery, he got carried away, you know, it was an accident, he didn't really mean it, calm down, everything's peaceful, shanti, 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 and they go, oh, okay. And the wedding would go on. So the Kshatriyas are like that. They have their, you know, the Kshatriyas were allowed to drink a little alcohol, and if they were, in order to hone their fighting skill, they would go into the forest and fight with animals. Sometimes they would go to fight a tiger with a knife. You know, this is the kind of very, how do you say, fiery nature that the Kshatriyas have, which is very different to the Brahmanas. And interestingly, in the Gurukul system, they all grow up together. The Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, they grow up together. As children, they haven't yet fully developed. You know, it's like, although someone maybe have Brahminical qualities or Vaishya qualities or Kshatriya qualities, those qualities have to be honed. They have to be trained in those qualities so that they can fulfill their destiny. A Kshatriya will be a very restless boy until he's fully trained up into how to harness that energy and to put it to use in the right place. So in the Gurukul, these boys, they grow up together and they appreciate. The Kshatriya boy sees the Brahmin boy and he thinks, you know, he's always getting up early in the morning, easily, and he's chanting very nicely, and he's singing very nicely, and he does his puja so nicely. I wish I had that quality. And, you know, the Brahmin boy is seeing the Kshatriya boy, and he's, you know, they learn the same mantras, they learn the same shlokas, they do the same things in Gurukul, but some of them are more inclined to some aspects, and some are more inclined to others. So when they eventually grow up and leave Gurukul, they go off to their respective communities, but they have a profound respect for each other. This is the value of Gurukul, is it creates that respect amongst the community members, which they carry on into adulthood. So even though they may be situated in their different areas, because of their dealings in Gurukul, they know how to deal with each other and they know how to respect each other. And this is the important thing in terms of ruling the world. Prabhupada describes how the Kshatriyas, they have all the power, they have all the physical power, if you like, they have the weapons, they have the prowess, they have the fearlessness to go into battle, but they know that they're lacking in wisdom. From Gurukul they understand, there's something I'm lacking in, and I have to go to the Brahmana. Before I make any big decisions, those decisions should be made by the Brahmana. And this is the perfection. In the modern world, the Kshatriyas get completely, out of control. They think they know everything. They think they're God's gift to humanity. And they make big mistakes. And then you have chaos. And this is what we see. World War I, World War II. There's wars going on everywhere. All because society is not being managed properly. And it's not recognizing the importance and the value of the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, and the Vaishyas, and the whole Varnashram system. So in this way, the world is crazy, as Prabhupada described in the Purport. They have no idea of Krishna consciousness. They have no idea of how to behave properly. They think that Krishna consciousness is just mythology. And therefore, anything that comes after it, anything that we have to say about anything, is based on a falsehood. And so it's not worth taking into consideration. So I'll end there. Anyone got any comments or questions?
That was an interesting point you made about how the high-rise buildings had a negative impact on interpersonal relationships. And there's a whole study on that, or is that just an observation, a study?
No, there's a study, yeah.
There is a plan, the master plan here in Mayapur, that team is planning to have all G+5 buildings here. And so it would be interesting, I think it would be helpful for them to read that study and the impact it will have on interpersonal relationships, and which are an essential part of bhakti. I'm not saying this in a critical way, but this could be very helpful.
No, definitely.
You could provide them with that study and the results that come from that, and also your own personal example with your mother.
It was interesting because in that study, the maximum allowable or the maximum recommended height was 4 stories. Because from 4 stories you can still see facial features. And so in Scotland, especially, there was one place in Glasgow where the kids, they would go out to play after school. And they would get hungry at about 4 o'clock. And so they would go to, they would be downstairs and they'd shout up to their mum in the 4th floor. And the mum would throw them a sandwich, like a jam sandwich or something like that. And from 4 floors, they could catch it. But from 5th floors, that was when communication broke down. And those days, that's when they were building 10, 15, story flats. And above 4 floors, there's just, the communication is lost. You're just isolated. So, of course, that was also amongst, non-Krishna conscious personalities. And in a situation where you've got devotees with their bhajan and their, sadhana, it's somewhat mitigated. But yeah, I agree. There are many places in South India, there's a rule in some towns that you should not build above the height of a palm tree or a coconut tree. And actually, I remember when I visited Sri Rangam, they saw that I was a foreigner, and many foreigners are not allowed in the temple. So he said to me, there's one guide was there, he said to me, would you like to see the whole of Sri Rangam? So he took me up some stairs onto the roof of one of the ashram buildings. And you look out, and all you could see were coconut trees and gopurams. Gopurams, these big gates, these big, huge 10-story gates that they have. So it's actually a really dense town. There's shops and apartments and hotels and things, but they're all built below the level of the coconut trees. And when you get up to the level of the coconut trees and you look out, you just see green swaying coconut trees and beautiful gopurams. So it's actually it's a very nice, just from the aesthetic point of view, not going beyond 4 or 5 stories is is a very nice thing to do. One of the reasons why they're going to 5 stories here is because of the flood. 1 story is 6 stories. I don't think that's a very good idea. Actually, I think as far as I understand, the government rule is 5 stories is maximum, but they pay a bit of bakshish, and you get 6 or 7 stories. So that's one of the difficulties of building out here in the countryside. But it's I'll bring that study to them.
I mean, in Prabhupada, in the Purport to text 4 of Nectar of Instruction, says that he created ISKCON as a facility for executing the 6 loving exchanges between devotees. That personalism is so important. And then he goes on to say, simply by executing these 6 loving exchanges, one can achieve spiritual perfection. So it's a very, very significant part of devotion, the interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
And that, having a kind of a loving mood. Not that everyone's isolated all by themselves.
Right.
We'll probably see devotees jumping off the top of the buildings, because they're so isolated and disturbed.
One of the things, like over in the Grihastha which was the first buildings we built here, I made sure that we had, like, in the doorways of some of the first houses, there was seating arrangements, so that when someone walked past, they could see someone sitting there and they're catching the breeze, and then that relationship would be developed. So I tried to do that in the very beginning. But then, unfortunately, land was sold to individuals, and then those individuals realized that they could make vast amounts of profit by making 6, 7, 8-story buildings. I think 7 stories is the maximum we've got now. And so beyond the gates of ISKCON, this became an issue. Within most of the housing we did, ISKCON did itself. I think 4 stories is maximum we've done so far.
That's what it is.
Yeah. So a lot of it is done by private developers who are just maximizing profit and not really thinking about maximizing human relationships, unfortunately.
No, it's very significant that this be checked, in my opinion.
Yeah.
But I'm not in management, so...
We need to get devotees onto the government of India. And then we can set things straight. Okay, I have to end there. Oh, we don't do that anymore, do we? Jai. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai.